Well, folks, another batch of classified documents has been found in Joe's possession, this time in a garage-adjacent room in his Delaware home. So that brings the count to this so far. Documents found in a closet at the Penn Biden Center. They actually found those just days before the midterm elections, though it took over 2 months to report it. Convenient. Then in December, they found some more documents in the garage of Biden's private home in Wilmington, Delaware. But don't worry, they were next to his prized Corvette, so basically Fort Knox, folks. But wait, there's more. Last week, his personal attorneys found more classified material at his home. On Thursday of last week, the dumbest woman to ever stand behind anything told us the search was complete. It wasn't. On Saturday, the White House lawyer announced he discovered 5 more pages of classified documents at Biden's Wilmington home. None of this material was found via FBI raid, mind you. That's only reserved for political enemies of the deep state, so don't expect a raid of Jill's underwear drawer anytime soon. But don't worry, Biden and team are fully cooperating, and he is still mystified as to how those documents got there and what's in them. The dementia card works for Joe, but it doesn't work for KJP, who has had a hell of a time explaining all of this. I mean, it's just painful to watch.
And you have said repeatedly, the president has said he takes classified documents very seriously. Does he think the garage is an appropriate place to store classified material?
He was surprised that the records were there.
Documents were found December 20th in his garage in Wilmington. Why was that not immediately addressed? Is the White House being transparent about that?
We have been transparent here.
So can you just clear this up?
I would refer you back to the statement. I don't have anything more to say.
And then on these documents, how could anyone be that irresponsible? Isn't that what this president says about mishandling classified documents?
The president spoke to this personally. He spoke to this personally, and he believes that classified documents and information should be taken seriously. He takes them seriously.
Well, that was insightful. But here's what I want to know. If the first batch was found in early November at the Penn Biden Center, yes, before the midterms, and just 2 months after Mar-a-Lago was raided and Trump was publicly shamed, why did it take so long to report on it? Plus, even after the existence of the first batch was revealed last week, why was there no mention of the second batch that was found in December in Delaware? And why were Biden's personal lawyers conducting the searches of his homes? Playing dumb or even being dumb is not full cooperation, Joe and friends. It's just not. And I'm going to give you my theory later in final thoughts. But first, I'm digging deeper into this whole charade with Townhall senior writer Julio Rosas. That's next.
We have asked for an assessment in the intelligence community of the Mar-a-Lago documents. I think we ought to get that same assessment of the documents found in the think tank as well as the home of President Biden. I'd like to know what these documents were. I'd like to know what the IC's assessment is, whether there was any risk of exposure and what the harm would be and whether any mitigation needs to be done.
I mean, pretty typical of the mainstream media to get expert guidance on classified Joe from the congressman who spent years peddling a false Russiagate narrative, even when he knew it was a load of BS. But what else do you really expect from ABC News? Joining me now with his take on that and so much more is Townhall.com senior writer Julio Rosas. Julio, I'm glad to have you with me. I want to start with all this classified Joe mumbo jumbo. Over the weekend, we find another batch and a whole lot more information's coming out. What is your top line thoughts? How do you think they discovered all this classified information, and why do you think it took so long to get the news out?
Well, for quick background, I actually held a security clearance when my time in the Marine Corps Reserves. My job required to handle classified information, and so when we were going through training, we were taught the different ways to handle it and what to do and what not to do. And obviously what President Biden has done, and apparently has been doing for a long time, is he's violated very basic rules for keeping and storing classified documentation. And of course, when we talk about with what's happened with Trump, the main difference is that he was vice president and not president. There's different authorities that come with that. But in terms of, why they've all of a sudden kind of found this or, have come out with the news for this after it's been known for a while. I mean, it's obviously pretty clear that they wanted to keep it under wraps during the midterms. Do I think it would have made much of a difference? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, obviously the results were not what Republicans were hoping for, but it would just have definitely been another issue that is on a mountain of issues that have come from from the Biden administration. So I really think that, this attempt to downplay what has been happening with how he handled this type of documentation is, of course, expected from the mainstream media. But people need to really understand that, the intent is, whether the intent's there or not, he did break all these rules.
So I have to ask you, you once had a security clearance. If you had placed classified documents next to your sports car in your garage, would you be in jail right now, Julio?
I would definitely be in the brig and be charged under the UCMJ and a host of other stuff. I mean, it would not have been good. Now, of course, I don't also have a son who's addicted to drugs and also has access to that. So that might have been the key difference there. But but in all seriousness, that's why. I mean, I remember when we were going through the schoolhouse, our instructors were telling us, similarly, since this was back in 2015. With the way Hillary Clinton handled classified information and how if they had done what she did or had done, it would not have been good. So this is just another example of how because Democrat. It's funny seeing the two side by sides the mainstream media has put out with the graphics between what Trump did and what Biden has done. It's literally the epitome of, well, it's okay if we do it.
Well, and then you brought up Hunter Biden, which I think is interesting because we're getting more information now that he was paying old Papa like 50 grand a month to stay in the house, which is also very odd. I mean, that's some pretty expensive rent for a home in Delaware. I think we're going to find more information, possibly linked to Hunter Biden, but I have a theory on all of this. I'm going to go into deeper detail later in my show. But now, as you mentioned before, it was really downplayed in November, December, but now I think they're upping the ante on the coverage of this. I think even the mainstream media that has spent so much time coddling Joe, I think they have their sights set on him, and I think he's a target now because I think they want Joe out of the way. I want your quick thoughts on that before we move on.
It is interesting because when you look at the things that have really been damaging to his presidency is the Afghanistan withdrawal, which obviously was completely botched. But this one is also pretty significant, pretty damaging because, again, with the attempts to explain it away, when you actually look at what was done and how the length that they've had these documents in these areas, it's also pretty damaging as well. So I think you're right in the sense that this is maybe another opportunity for people who are looking ahead in 2024 as just another chink in the armor that he has somehow managed to weather, because I cover the border crisis extensively, and that hasn't hurt him as much as some of the other topics that I've just laid out.
Yeah, because it's what Democrats choose to shine a light on that matters to people, and that's why they are now able to shine a light on it, because they want to get Joe out of the way. The things that they don't shine a light on, people don't care about. Isn't it funny how that works? I'm glad you brought it up, though, because I know that you've been doing a lot of reporting on what's happening not only at our southern border, but people often forget Florida, and they forget the coastline, and they forget the Keys. But right now, that area is being inundated with illegal immigrants. I know that you've been covering this. What exactly is going on in the Keys, and how nervous should Floridians and Americans be by the inundation that they're now starting to see in that part of the world?
So I literally just got back from the Florida Keys. I was with the Florida National Guard. I was embedded with them, going on patrols in the air. And basically, I mean, the reason why that they're there is because just like with the southern border, I mean, people coming from Cuba and Haiti have been happening for a very long time. But just like with the southern border, under this administration, it has gotten exponentially worse. And a lot of these towns, I mean, Key West is the biggest city there, and it's not that big by the rest of the country standards. And so when you have 200, 300, 400 people showing up within a very short amount of time, that is going to be very taxing on the local services. It's very taxing on accommodations for them, because the Border Patrol station is definitely not set up to house that many people over in Marathon. So it was very interesting to see that the Biden White House saying that Governor DeSantis ordering the National Guard to help out at their request is a political stunt that put people's lives at risk when they are literally running missions to detect if there are any boats in distress, because the Straits of Florida are not an easy thing to go through, even with regular boats.
Well, and listen, I've actually had a little bit of knowledge, because I'm also very close to Border Patrol, that have been sounding the alarm to me on this for at least the last year and a half, saying we're seeing more activity in this area. Of course, the spotlight has been shown on Texas and Arizona and their border crisis, but this has been increasing and increasing, and now it's finally getting some media attention because Governor DeSantis is having to deploy the National Guard and pay attention to this region. But I'll also say this. So there's a lot of Cubans coming over, and we feel for the Cuban people. My husband is Cuban. His family is all from Cuba. So we feel for these people that are fleeing oppression and they're fleeing communism. They might actually have legitimate asylum claims, but it also speaks to the bigger picture. It doesn't matter who's coming over here. We cannot absorb that many people, and now they're coming in at every nook and cranny they possibly can. What has Border Patrol as well as the National Guard told you about what they think they're going to see in the coming months in that region?
They think they're going to see basically, hopefully, the fruits of the National Guard's labor in terms of deterrence, because now, since there's more eyes on the shores and in the waters, there are definitely going to be a greater chances of people being interdicted before they even reach American shores. One of the most concerning things that I learned, a former Border Patrol agent who was stationed in the Keys, he told me that there are now only 3 agents and 3 supervisors permanently assigned to the Keys. That is a significant drop from 22 agents back in 2015, 2016. And there's multiple reasons why agents have decided to leave or retire even prior to this. But obviously, when, just like with the southern border, they can't patrol the shoreline because they are too busy processing 100 people, which is totally abnormal for that region. And so the numbers are smaller, but proportion to what their responsibilities are, it is completely overwhelming. But even still, I mean, in fiscal year 2022, Border Patrol encountered over 4,000 people when the norm was 1,000 people per fiscal year. So, I mean, this is definitely I mean, it's no coincidence that it's happening right now under this administration. People see what the Biden administration is allowing, and they're willing to take that risk within the ocean, just like with the desert. So it's very tragic to see that. But it's also tragic that Americans in these communities are once again bearing the brunt of this.
Yeah, I also wonder what it's going to be like in that area. That's a vacation destination. So it's one thing when it's happening in small border towns in Arizona and Texas. It's another thing when it's happening in the Florida Keys. Luckily, they have a great governor that's going to do everything that he can. So I'm very hopeful and optimistic about their response there. Last thing I want to ask you about, because I know that you were heavily involved and embedded during the Summer of Love 2020 with those mostly peaceful riots. And in fact, you wrote a book about it. I want to make sure I get the title here. Fiery but mostly peaceful, the 2020 riots and the gaslighting of America. I love that title. I love the book. Real quick, what would my viewers read about in your book? What did you experience, and what are you going to tell about?
If people were to buy the book, they were going to find out what actually happened. And I was as many places I could be. I couldn't be in 2 places at once, unfortunately, but I was at Minneapolis, Kenosha, here in Washington, D.C. for the riots that were happening here. And it was my firsthand account, along with the firsthand account of survivors who went through even worse things than what I saw about that. Yes, there were protests in 2020, but there were also riots. And these were riots from the BLM movement, from the Antifa movement. I spent time in Portland multiple times. And it's just, it's supposed to be history because as we saw, and as the title implies, I mean, that's where I literally get my title from that CNN chyron from Kenosha, where they were trying to downplay riots that were happening there. And so people are going to know the truth of what happened. And it's unfortunate that it has to fall to someone who works at a small conservative outlet to be one of the few people who was out there on the ground and just trying to get the word out and what I was seeing. But that's what happened. And even still today, people wanted to talk about January 6th, which I was also there to cover and also talk about in the book. But the 2020 riots were also real, and they also affected real people, and it caused major damage. And we are still feeling the effects today when it comes to policing and the high crime rates that we are now currently experiencing, unfortunately, in our cities. And so, I mean, there's a direct line between today and what happened almost 3 years ago now.
Yeah, and January 6th was one day, and the summer of riots was an entire summer long, and in some places like Portland, it continued much longer than that. But I thank you for documenting the history, because you're right, people quickly forgot about that time. And when COVID took a hiatus, by the way, we also remember that. But it's nice that we have people out there like yourself that are willing to not only embed yourself in dangerous situations, essentially what was a war zone, but also to tell about it for those that are going to conveniently forget. So I think it's fantastic. I love the title of your book. Thanks for everything that you've done and all the investigative work that you've been doing, even when it's not fun and even when it's a little dangerous. Julio, thank you so much for being with me today, and we'll talk to you soon.